Welcome everyone to our November 17th meeting of the Cambridge Club. I'm Kathy Zusi and I welcome you to What's Up with America's Waste, featuring our speaker, Michael Orr, Cambridge's recycling director. Michael Orr oversees all waste diversion programs with the goal of reducing trash 80% by 2050. With a 2008 as a baseline. With the $1 million budget, he oversaw the expansion of curbside composting to 25,000 households in 2018. He also has implemented the city's zero waste master plan, the plastic bag and styrene ordinances, mattress recycling, and expanded commercial recycling and composting. Anyway, he's been doing amazing work and we're very lucky to have him speaking to us tonight. Michael, take it away.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. We are very excited to kind of share both some history of waste and recycling in Massachusetts and or in Cambridge as well, but also what the future kind of looks like. And I lost my, okay, here we go. Share screen. And I hope everyone can see this. All right, so I'm gonna jump right in and let's talk about America's waste. So MSW is what this is saying over here. MSW rates, that's basically trash, municipal solid waste is what that stands for. So over the last couple decades, we're seeing a steady incline of the per capita generation of waste of pounds per person per day. Right now, we're at about 4.9 pounds per person per day. And that's kind of like directly trash, which is kind of the trash you put out every day. And that's kind of some of the indirect trash, which is trash that ends up at commercial facilities from dining out or from offices, from industrial things. So as a society, we're kind of trending in the wrong direction in some respects. And so I'm here to kind of cast some light onto that and see if we can move the needle back the other direction. And this is all very informal, so feel free to stop me whenever. So when we look at what's going in the trash, mostly landfills in the United States, in Massachusetts specifically, we do more incineration than landfill, mostly because land is expensive. But at least 40% of our trash can be recycled or otherwise diverted from the trash. The big piece of the pie is food waste. 24% is the kind of national average. In Cambridge, it's a little bit higher. Plastics, yard trimmings, metals, glass, all these things can be recycled. A vast majority of what we produce can be recycled. And when we do audits of our Cambridge's trash, we literally put on Tyvek suits and we pick through the trash from a few households, we find that about 70% of what's put into the trash can be diverted and not sent to a landfill or incinerator. So it's at least 40% of what we trash can be diverted. And so when we talk about trash, it is very personal. So this is Cambridge in the 1950s or 60s. I don't know exactly when. We got this from the Historic Society. This is, I don't know if anyone can guess where this might be, but it's a very famous park that is very beautiful, but it wasn't up until 1973. Danahy Park is right. Yeah. So this is, one shot of it. This is kind of a good aerial shot. You can kind of see Fresh Pond is up here, curling around. You see Fresh Pond Parkway going over here. And this spur, this rail spur right here, is the one that kind of cuts around the back of, kind of near the back end of Danahy Park, New Street. So yeah, this is all the landfill right here. Huge amount of space. Even the Tobin School had some landfill space at one point, so that had to be cleaned up in the latest construction over there. So it's all very personal. Here's another view of Danahy Park. You can see in Ringe Ave, there's that little small cemetery in Ringe Ave. Here it is right there. And I don't know if people know what this might be. That's a smokestack from the 1911 construction of an incinerator. We had an incinerator right there in town, right next to the commuter rail. I don't know if that was commuter rail back then, but next to that railroad. So, this is definitely very personal. Now we export a lot of it. You can see a broken down car placed in the landfill. In today's world, we definitely wouldn't landfill a car. It's got great valuable metal in it, but back then we did that. So in the 1990s, we really started moving towards actually recycling and doing a better job of managing our waste. We had closed our landfill 18 years earlier, in 1973, and there's huge push to do the right thing. I think this, a lot of the movement in recycling followed the famous New York City barge of trash. I definitely don't remember that. I was too young, but folks on the call might remember that infamous story of where do we take this barge of trash from New York City? And so recycling kind of evolved out of that. So here's City Hall, you can see, and this is one of the first advertisements of recycling. And then here's the famous photo of Robert Winters. Still kind of looks like him. This is him at Dannehy Park. This is where we actually started a lot of the recycling. So he got him and a bunch of volunteers gathered to collect paper, and they'd put it in this truck, and that would get hauled out to be recycled. And a lot of volunteers, and it looked like a lot of fun people had helping out. We even had the Commissioner of Public Works, Bill Sommers, and I have never met, but I learned that he was the Commissioner of Public Works, and he was a big supporter. And here's some more photos of volunteers helping load up the paper for recycling. And some more volunteers. I don't know if anyone might recognize any of these people, but what you might recognize is this beautiful tree back here. So this is the edge of Dannehy Park, kind of near Sherman Street. I believe that tree is still there, actually. So, and in 1991, we started curbside recycling with this fun little poster. This is Give Your Trash 9 Lives. It was kind of a fun little advertisement that our department had done. And this is really cool to kind of find like the history of the start of this program. And as part of forming that, we had a recycling advisory committee that started as part of that. And I think there's Robert Winters right there as well. So he's always been an intricate part of the recycling world. Here's the recycling advisory committee meeting in 2014. And today we still have a very active committee, and those meetings are every month, and people are always welcome to join and listen in. And I saw Henrietta Davis is on, so I thought a little shout out when Henrietta Davis was mayor. Here's one of our programs that we had launched a couple years ago. So exactly what happens to your stuff when it's not recycled? So landfilled, mostly incinerated, these metals, the glass, the plastics, they sit idle forever. And these are commodities. These are valuable items that could be reused, recycled, turned into something new. There's a market for all of that stuff. And then when it comes down to like papers and other organic items like food waste and yard waste, they decompose and release methane when placed in landfills. And I don't know if people followed the climate talks, but methane was a big talk at COP26, and it's a greenhouse gas that's more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's really important to reduce the amount of methane that we're generating. So getting stuff out of the landfill is kind of one of the big steps that we can do personally to reduce our methane generation. And, just to kind of reiterate the value of recycling, not only are you conserving natural resources, creating jobs, you are protecting against climate change by doing it. And so this is a study that was done as to how much do you reduce your emissions by recycling glass, by recycling aluminum, steel, plastics, etc. And here's the reduced emissions percentage. So by recycling glass, you reduce emissions by 41%, aluminum 96%, so on and so forth. So each of these items, when they're recycled into turning into something else, you're saving energy. You're saving, emissions from being emitted. So huge opportunities to recycle to fight climate change. So what do you need to know about recycling? And again, if people do have some questions, feel free to just chime right in. There's a lot of talk in recent years about the China National Sword policy, which was a limit on the importing of recycling to China. And no one really disagreed with this process. What it did was it sent shockwaves through the industry, basically. So prices shift very quickly. Prices shift upwards. But like most commodities, it does vary. So, you might hear stories in the news saying recycling, why does it matter? It's all just going to get trashed because it's not worth it or economically. But that's just a temporary thing sometimes. And that might be regional. But like all things in all commodities, the prices shift. So gasoline was $2.50 2 months ago. Now it's $3.50. So kind of like gasoline, the commodity rates for recycling shift. And right now, commodities for recycling are at record highs. And that's very much tied into the whole supply chain crisis that we're seeing in the United States due to the COVID and backlogs and all these other things. So, some people might think of recycling as doing the right thing environmentally. Other people could also think about it as this is the first step of our supply chain in America. So, recycling is far from dead. In the last couple of years, more than $100 million have been invested in the United States to retrofit or build more recycle mills. There's even a couple paper mills in Maine that have been reopened after they closed to accept recycling. And it's kind of ironic, but it's actually Chinese investors going to Maine and saying, hey, we want to reopen this place. We want to take the papers in, recycle them into pulp. And once they're in a pulp form, we can import it into China because that's not a part of the China National Sword. So it's very interesting how things are shaping out. And it's also interesting not hearing this stuff in the mainstream media, but in our recycling world, this is what we're hearing is that there are huge investments happening in recycling is far from dead. And a little bit about where your recycling goes. So cardboard and other papers mostly stay in North America. Some of it's shipped in.
Yeah. I don't think I imagine.
Is there a garden out there?
Sorry, I don't know if that's a question, but plastics like PET, which are kind of like these bottles you see here, they're shipped to American and Canadian plants to be recycled into new items. HDPE plastic, which is kind of like your milk jug or your laundry detergent jug, and your polypropylene, PP, is your yogurt cup. Those are both recycled here in the southeastern United States, Midwest United States, and Canada. Aluminum in Kentucky, and glass stays here in Massachusetts. So a lot of the stuff isn't going international. That's a kind of little misperception. But part of that is it's regional. West Coast recyclers often go international because it's easier to reach China than it is to reach the Southeast United States from that area. And that's due to shipping and logistics like that. So why should we care about this? And in another format, in Massachusetts specifically, we have a trash disposal capacity of about 5 million tons in 2017, and it is quickly dwindling. So this is the estimated disposal capacity for all incinerators and landfills in Massachusetts. So we've cut it by 1.3 million tons in just 4 years. So a lot of landfills are closing. They're required to close. They're running out of space. We're running out of places to put our stuff. So we really need to figure out how to divert more and do it very quickly. So a little bit about organic waste management. So organics in our world means not necessarily what you get at Whole Foods, but organics means yard waste and kind of food waste. And those are the two major streams. So, as you know, you put out your yard waste barrel, we collect it weekly, we send that to a compost site, and we've been doing that since 1991. And food waste is kind of a little bit newer, as we talked about the curbside compost program. But there are some iterations of composting that we've done before that. So there's the honey bucket and the honey wagon that people might remember from the early 70s, late 60s. That was another form of food waste composting, and then we had backyard composting. So it's a huge topic, and it's spanning many generations. So this is just a little bit of information about where does food waste come from in the United States, and 40% of it is residential. That's a big reason why we're pushing residential composting. Restaurants, food services, supermarkets, they do quite a bit as well. They tend to do a better job just because it hurts their bottom line to throw out food waste. So, saving every bit of food waste is good for restaurants and supermarkets. But food waste is one of the largest contributors to climate change behind, if someone has this famous saying that if food waste were a country, it'd be number 3 in the world in terms of emissions of greenhouse gases, behind China and the United States. So huge opportunity to really move the needle by diverting our food waste and doing more with our food waste. So what's happening around food waste in the United States? So Massachusetts was actually the first state to ban food waste from businesses that were generating more than 1 ton per week. They were required to divert it starting in 2014. So that was a huge monumental step. Connecticut, New York, Maryland, and Minnesota have all taken action like that in the last couple of years. And Vermont actually mandated all food waste must be diverted starting in July of 2020. So that means residential and commercial and businesses all must divert their food waste from the trash, put it into compost. And the biggest news is California is banning all food waste from all residents, businesses, and institutions by January 1 of 2022. So this is not a small little thing that Cambridge is doing. We are part of the bigger trend that's happening nationwide and really internationally as well. But nationwide, we're seeing huge trends in this direction, and that's because there's huge investment happening and huge new infrastructure that's being built to accommodate that. So one of the big innovations that's driving change in the food waste disposal market is anaerobic digestion. I'd say anaerobic digestion for food waste is an emerging technology. Anaerobic digestion isn't necessarily old. What anaerobic digestion means is it's basically putting organic material into a vessel that does not have any oxygen. So anaerobic means no air, no oxygen. So it allows you close off this whole vessel and you allow microbes to go and do their thing, and they generate methane and whatever leftover solids in the form of fertilizer is kind of what the 2 byproducts are. So it's emerging technology because you can do more digestion, you can manage more food per acre of site, so like you can have a smaller footprint of a facility, but handle much more food waste than a traditional compost site. So it's really taken off in the food waste management and waste management in general worlds. And the EPA has a food recovery hierarchy. So, when we talk about food waste, we want to first reduce the amount of food waste there is overall. So that means, eating leftovers. That means, making sure that things don't go bad, making sure that you're selling things by their sell-by date or really, doing more to make sure that food doesn't go to disposal. And then, after that, you want to feed hungry people, feed animals. And then this is where anaerobic digestion falls in terms of the hierarchy. So it's good at recovering energy in the food and preserving the nutrients for fertilizer. So you have 2 byproducts, and it's a low greenhouse gas footprint for doing that. And then after that is composting and then disposal, meaning landfill or incineration. Let me know if I'm going too fast. I'm happy to slow down.
I think the pace is great. So it's fascinating. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mike, do you know if your slides will be available anywhere, perhaps afterwards? Can you put them on the town website or something? Because they're really fascinating and contain a lot of information.
Yeah, I could probably just send it out to you all and email it to the group.
The recording will also be on our website after the event.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So Mike, my recollection was that when you went to digested compost instead of whatever, it was controversial for some reason. Why is it controversial?
So it's a new technology, and it wasn't. It is, and it still is very new. I mean, this really only started in the last 10 years. So it's taking off across the United States. So as I mentioned here, there's co-digesting, meaning food waste is digested with either manure or wastewater, or on its own. That's happening at more than 100 facilities nationally. So Oakland, California, Los Angeles, New York City, upstate New York, even Hershey, Pennsylvania, where they have the Hershey manufacturers, they use anaerobic digestion. I don't quite know where the controversy is coming from. So what happens with the food waste is it goes into the anaerobic digestion. It's mixed in with treated wastewater, which is just poop, pee, and whatever you put down your sink. So the two things are combined, and what's generated is methane. That methane is captured and it's used to make clean energy. So they actually do it on site, and they make their own electricity and they make their own heat. It's a very sustainable process because you don't have transmission loss from the electrical lines, and you don't have transmission loss from natural gas pipelines. So now the facility where our food waste goes, it's a net zero wastewater treatment plant because of this program. And it's not just Cambridge. We're only 5 or 7% of their inputs. So a lot of big industrial manufacturers send their food waste to this site. So, grocery stores, supermarkets, many restaurants go there. So the other byproduct after the methane is what are called biosolids, which are just kind of the leftover like solids. And it's mostly just, your macronutrients, which are potassium, calcium, phosphorus, some carbon, and some micronutrients like zinc and, just typical things that you'd find in your own food. There are some concerns with biosolids and them being applied in the environment. Some of those concerns are, they're real. There are chemicals in our environment that we don't want to get exposed to our environment. But I think the fundamental issue is that some of the chemicals that might end up in biosolids or might end up in wastewater are going to get exposed into the environment no matter what, because we've introduced chemicals into the environment to begin with. So, for instance, there might be concerns with PFAS. I don't know if people know what PFAS, PFAS, perfluorinated alkyl substances. It's kind of a new chemical that everyone's talking about because it is very persistent, and it's very damaging, and it can be very disruptive to our hormone cycles. And it's showing up in lots of different places in our environment. But wastewater treatment plants aren't generating it. They're the response to what the society is generating. So if we as a society generate PFAS, then it's ultimately going to end up in our waterways or on our land. There is no such thing as in a way. There is no such thing as, ridding ourselves of chemicals. We just have to stop creating them to begin with. So
can I just add a couple things to what you're saying? Because the controversy, as I understand it, has to do with the wastewater, as you pointed out. And the reason is because the wastewater, yes, it contains the toilet waste and sink waste from domestic places, but it also includes industries that are located in the sewer shed. If you think of it sort of like a watershed, it's a sewer shed. So you'd have commercial and industrial places discharging to that same waste stream, that then the solids get mixed with the food waste that Cantabrigians generate. And so it's not just biodegradable. On top of that, you've got personal care products that make up nail polish remover, all kinds of toxics that can end up there. And I think the major concern has to do with metals, heavy metals that accumulate in food crops when they're applied to agricultural or even home use when it's used as fertilizer that you can put on your home garden for your own vegetables. That's what the controversy is, I think.
Yeah, so some of the caveats to that is the industrial waste, they actually are required to go through a pre-treatment before they send their stuff to the wastewater treatment plant. So that's, we actually had a conversation this morning with the executive director from Greater Lawrence Sanitary District about this. We didn't touch on that,
Yeah,
but
I used to be the branch chief for the Mass DEP industrial wastewater regulatory branch. And what you say is absolutely true, and that's fine and dandy. What most people don't say with that is that the dischargers that are permitted under that program are only the biggest dischargers, and they're few and far between. So for instance, Greater Lawrence will have maybe 20 dischargers permitted. And yes, there are regulations that limit discharge, but if you ask about how that's enforced, you'll get sort of people looking at their shoes.
Right. And I mean, this is a great topic because it kind of gets to the root cause of the issue, and that's that we have too many pollutants in our environment to begin with. And that the fact that we are still introducing these things to wastewater treatment plants, because ultimately we can't, take all the water from an industrial plant or take all the water from a wastewater treatment plant and bury it in a landfill. That water has to be recycled back into the environment somewhere or the other. And so the fundamental issue is that why do we have these chemicals? Why do we allow that? And I think that's something and it's such a tough one because, how do you say no to allowing, an industry to do its work here in Massachusetts, but if we ban it from happening in Massachusetts, it's just going to go to a developing country where it's going to pollute their water. So it gets very complicated. The fundamental issue. It
gets even more complicated when you think about nursing homes and hospitals with cancer patients on chemotherapy and the toxics that are coming out of there. And it's as you say, though, I think the root of it is managing these toxics in a more intelligent way. I think you're absolutely right there.
Yeah. And at the end of the day,
Can I ask a quick practical question? Because this touches on something I've been wondering whether I should have my food waste in Cambridge go through a company like Bootstrap, that'll pick it up at the doorstep, because then it gets combined with other food waste and it keeps it out of that loop that other things are entering into. And so in some sense, maybe is preserved for higher purpose or something. Is there anything to that? Or do you think it contributes more value if it goes through the Cambridge curbside pickup? Because those are options that are available to people who can pay for something like Bootstrap, where things are used for agriculture.
And so again, we have two organic waste streams. We have yard waste and food waste. Yard waste always goes to compost because you can't anaerobically digest yard waste. So, we could do a lot more soil production as a community if we collected more leaves off the curbs, more leaves off the streets. So that's one organic waste stream, and that's 2,000 tons a year. Food waste is probably 2,000 tons a year as well. And, we had this EPA study, which I might get to in a little bit, where it said for global warming potential, the best thing is to send it to an anaerobic digestion over composting. But I actually don't really care. I think if you want to get your food waste out and you want to send it to Bootstrap, by all means do it. If you want to put it in our program, we would love to have it. I think the fundamental goal is get it out of the landfill. And that's number one. But going back to the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District, so they're producing these biosolids before, we introduced our food waste into that program. So it's always been happening, and it happens at wastewater treatment plants across the nation. And there's a lot of talk, and we actually had the EPA come on and talk about this whole program and how they studied biosolids and studied anaerobic digestion, and that they think there's more value in getting all the nutrients out of anaerobic digestion and reapplying it. Because if you don't use those nutrients, you're going to use natural gas to then create new fertilizers. And so you're actually contributing to climate change if you do not use the biosolids. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't in some people's minds. But the biosolids are nutrients and products that are valuable to, but they also don't get applied to farms. So these biosolids are not meant to be used on farms per se. So these are to help grow grass or trees or things like that on highways, golf courses, and different places where you're not exposing it in terms of like food production.
Mike, I'm thinking, please finish your lecture, your slides, and then let's return to Q&A. So we won't be sharing the screen and we can see one another talking, but I think you should finish your presentation and then we'll return to Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, so managing food waste in the United States, overwhelming amount of it is landfilled or what's called controlled combustion, which is incineration. It's just put it in a trash incinerator. So, only a little bit of it is being reused. And so co-digestion, anaerobic digestion is a big piece of that. Composting is, donation and animal feed are as well. So a little bit about how anaerobic digestion works. So I guess, maybe a good background so everyone can kind of be on the same page. So I stole this from a different website because they had a really great image, but you take your food waste and you put it in a depackaging and pre-treatment plant, which is what Cambridge uses. So we want to make sure the food waste is clean before they send it to the anaerobic digester. And then from there, the gas is produced. This thing holds the gas, and then they put it into a combined heat and power unit, which is kind of a more sustainable like power plant because you don't have as much loss in transmission, and you can just use it right there on site. So you make your own electricity and you make your own heat. And then the other byproduct is the digestate, is what you call it, or biosolids or biofertilizer. And so that can be applied to fields. So that's how anaerobic digestion works. And so it can happen in different ways. You can do it at a farm. You can mix food waste and manure and make methane and fertilizer. This is a farm in Vermont that is doing that. You can put the natural gas that is created right back in the pipeline, or you can use it on site. Here's anaerobic digestion at a wastewater treatment plant. So you collect it and make it into a slurry. You send that slurry to the anaerobic digestion tank, you make gas, then you can utilize it. And then biosolids. And so very similar. And so this is the EPA study that I was referencing. This was done in 2019. They hired Eastern Research Group, which is based out of, I think, Lexington, Mass, and to do a life cycle environmental assessment. So this is kind of like, let's look at all components of disposing of food waste. So they looked at avoided electricity, avoided natural gas use, what happens environmentally when you apply leftovers of these items to land, unit process emissions, which is basically like what emissions are associated with running this operation, avoided fertilizer, electricity on site. So they look at this in a very holistic way. And they came up with this result of the net global warming potential of each disposal options. These disposal options are co-digestion at Greater Lawrence Sanitary District. CORE is the facility where food waste goes first. It's Waste Management's core facility in Charlestown. From Charlestown, they take it up to North Andover to Greater Lawrence Sanitary District. So that's what Cambridge does right here. Windrow composting, aerated static pile composting, landfilling, waste to energy. So for global warming potential, this is where they found that the co-digestion was best for global warming. Composting, not bad, definitely better than landfill. So, that's the real goal. It's not putting it in the landfill. So they looked at this thing very holistically. I mean, we had the scientists that worked on this on a call for the Science in the City event that the city hosted in April. And it's on YouTube, and I could send that out if people are interested to really hear from the scientists that did this, that believe that what we're doing is great. It's a great thing for the environment, so we just need more people to do it. So moving away from organics, let's talk about other forms of recycling. So in Cambridge, we have mattress recycling. We are very close to launching a textiles recycling program on November 29th, so stay tuned to that. But textiles, they're very easy and very valuable commodities. So, and even if they're torn, stained, ripped, whatever, they're okay to be reused or repurposed in some ways. So we're really excited to be able to capture a lot more textiles out of the trash. And that means clothing, shoes, towels, bedding, teddy bears, anything that's a textile like that will be accepted. And I have to talk about reduce and reuse, and talk about waste management. We really have to be talking reduce, reuse first. So, one of the big things I hear is, I don't want to use single-use plastic. I want to use, maybe a aluminum can or a glass bottle. And my biggest thing is switching from plastic or from plastic to aluminum or aluminum to paper or whatever. They don't always equate less environmental damage. A single-use item is a single-use item. They all have huge environmental impacts. But switching from one item to a reusable item and reusing it hundreds of times, that does equate to reducing our environmental damage. So I think that's the big fundamental thing around reduce and reuses. It's all about reusing an item many, 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 many times, not just twice or 3 times or 4 times, but hundreds. And that's, the reason why I say switching from one container to another doesn't do that much is that most of the waste generated from our generation, we may see the aluminum can go into recycling, but there's a lot of upstream impacts of making that aluminum can. There's a lot of upstream environmental damage that happens just to make that can. And even though we're recycling it, we're reducing our damage. It doesn't make up for the stuff that happens upstream. So that's a big piece of the reduce reuse component. I think is really important to share. So I'm just going to close this out with like a couple top things that you can do from at least my vantage point, and people want to chime in as well. Food waste and yard waste are one of the top things that we could do to reduce our waste. The yard waste and the leaves that sit on roads and get cleaned up by street sweepings, those get landfilled. So we really need people's help to pick up those leaves from the curb and get them into the yard waste barrels or bags and put them out so we can collect them. If they go into street sweepings, they go to landfill and they go to generate methane. So that's huge opportunity. Textiles recycling, when that gets launched, really hope to see a huge burst with that. Textiles are very environmentally intensive, so recycling them, even if they're torn, can really make a huge difference because they can take a torn pair of jeans and they'll shred it up and turn it into insulation that they'll use on, they use it actually in people's homes. So when you get a mass save energy audit, sometimes they recommend insulation in your home. And I believe at one point they were doing a lot of like recycling of old textiles and turning them into insulation. So it's a really cool reuse opportunity. So textiles, small electronics. At the Recycle Center, we have an electronics bin that's available. We're open 3 days a week at the Recycle Center for electronics, for random metal items like hangers, you can bring those there. And then the other things to kind of think about in terms of diverting is just general household items. So donating or giving them away is a huge thing that we're proponents of. So sometimes we'll hear someone say like, I've got, a chair that I want to get rid of. I just don't want it. I'm like, just try to give it away. There might be a college student that would want it. sometimes it's really true in Cambridge and the Boston area is that one person's trash is another person's treasure. And so, someone that might be a grad student that just moved in, they're like dying for any chair to have in their house. So here are some websites that we recommend. Buy Nothing Cambridge is a Facebook group. There are 4 of them actually, so you could join one of those Facebook groups. They're really awesome. People will give away items, and you can claim items that you might want. It's great for your general knickknacks, the way I think about it. Because one thing I just want to implore is that nonprofits love donations, but they also they really only love the donations that they want. So a lot of them get a lot of stuff they don't want. And it actually does a little bit more harm than good by giving nonprofits things they don't want, because then they have to foot that trash disposal bill for those items they don't want. So it gets a little bit tricky when it comes to donating with nonprofits. I'd say, we should absolutely be supporting them. And often they say like the best support is just cash. But, if you're donating items, be sure you're donating the right items. And if you're unsure, we tend to say like these are the best kind of outlets where you kind of find, people in your community that might want stuff. So Nextdoor.com and Craigslist are also good places to go to just give away things. And some top things that I think, might be great for people to start changing today. And that's choosing reusable bags, reusable bottles every time. So every grocery store run, every, coffee in the morning. And then, if you're out and about getting takeout, refuse the bag, refuse the utensils, refuse the napkins, say, no, thank you, I don't need it. I know we all have too much of that, especially after this pandemic. One of my favorite things to recommend to people is optoutprescreen.com. That's a website that's created by I think the US Chamber of Commerce or something like that. It's the industry website so that you can opt out of unwanted mail. So I know we all get unwanted mail. So I highly recommend doing that. You can just have less paper that's being produced in the first place and sent to your home. Buying items with recycled content. So, you can go to a grocery store and you can get paper towels with 30% post-consumer recycled content. That's huge. Some people may be weary, but recycled content in your toilet paper is not that crazy of an idea. So finding items that have recycled content helps support the recycling industry. It helps keep that cycle going. So that's a huge opportunity. And then educate your friends and neighbors. If you learned something tonight, keep spreading the word. That helps us a lot. And we also highly recommend signing up for our email newsletter. We send out once a month. We've got 9,000 residents on it. And we share things like, we were giving away some compost bags at libraries this week. So we shared that in our newsletter for November. And so we're at a couple libraries this week giving out compost bags. And we'll share information about new trash bins that are going to be delivered to every household in Cambridge in the spring. So that's a huge new program that we're launching as well. So that is all I have. I'm happy to go back if any has any other questions. This is one of my favorite photos. This is adorable kid in West Cambridge that loved composting. And so he had a sign outside of his door saying, honk when you're here, compost delivery crews. And they did one better. They brought all the crews over. They all drove out. They wanted to get a group photo with the kid. And so all the delivery guys in 2018 did that for him. So I thought it was a cute little photo to end this. So yeah, any questions or any other thoughts?
Mike, you had said that Mass DEP is not allowing any new landfills and they're closing down the ones that are there. What's going to happen to trash that can't get diverted after that happens?
So
Mike,
a
can you
lot.
take off shared screen, please?
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
A lot of trash is going to be exported to New York. It's going as far as Ohio right now. We've heard some reports about South Carolina. It's just going to get exported further and further away, and it's going to get more and more expensive. But some of the things.
It won't be incinerated?
Well, the incinerators are full. They're at full capacity. And they're in neighborhoods where people don't want the incinerators. So even those are up in the air a little bit. So it's a daunting task to figure out what to do with all this trash. Some of the big updates that are going to happen over the next years, the state's going to, further strengthen their food waste mandate. So if you're a business that generates 1,000 pounds per week, you're going to be required to compost. So that's going to be all medium-sized businesses and up. Textiles will be banned from all trash disposal next year. Mattresses will be banned from all trash disposal in Massachusetts next year as well. And so this is all going to take effect in 11 and a half months, on November 1st, 2022. So that's going to be a huge, huge piece of moving the needle on trash disposal.
Michael, what do we do with the textiles though in 11 months?
So we'll have a program launched at the end of this month, and we're going to have two options. You can go to a drop-off bin that the city will have. Those are accessible 24/7, or you can get a free curbside collection. And so you would go onto our website, say, I've got 2 bags of textiles. You choose what date you want. We come by, and our contractor will come by and pick it up and take care of that.
Mike, can you talk more about, you talked about where our recycling goes. Can you talk a little bit more about how it's reused? You were saying earlier that plastics often become carpets, that glass might be the base for a road. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah, so plastics go, carpeting, textiles, clothing. Those are kind of the main things. Sometimes they go into new paint cans, for instance. Paper goes into more paper towels, toilet paper. That's why I was mentioning recycled content, because our recycling that we collect at the curb here goes right into those products you see at the grocery stores. Glass. So glass is an interesting one. Up until 2017, it was recycled in Massachusetts. There was one glass recycler in Massachusetts. The industry for beer and other items like that have been shifting towards aluminum cans because it has less emissions in terms of transportation. So if you're shipping 5,000 12-ounce containers of beer, if you did it all in glass, it's going to waste substantially more than if you did it all in aluminum. So the shift in the industry is going towards aluminum. And as a result, this glass recycler said, we've got 3 facilities in the United States: West Coast, Midwest, East Coast. Our East Coast is the worst performing one, so we're going to close that one down because we don't have enough glass demand from the glass recycling product. So glass is now recycled into new construction fill. So it's used as kind of like a drainage item in a lot of construction projects. So it's being reused, not what people probably envision, but it's definitely a better use than putting it in the landfill.
Thank you, Mike. Suzanne Plier, you have a question?
Thank you. What about recycling building materials? There are some cities that are requiring new buildings to use recycled, and wondering if that could be something viable here.
Yeah. So at the state level, they do ban the disposal of gypsum and a couple other construction materials from being landfilled or incinerated. But there are still, and same goes for asphalt, brick, and concrete. All those items cannot be landfilled and should not be landfilled. If someone goes to an incinerator or a landfill and dumps those items, and Mass DEP is there, they could fine them for inappropriate disposal. So, but there is still some more work to be done on that. And I think that's actually one of the big things that's going to happen over the next decade, is doing more on that. And that's one thing that I am lacking in terms of my knowledge, is really moving the needle on that. So we hope to get some more done on that soon.
Thank you.
Minka, did you have?
I do have a question. I clapped because I couldn't figure out where the raise my hand icon was. So my understanding is that the businesses in Cambridge don't usually participate in the Cambridge, trash and recycling. Maybe smaller ones do, but most of them don't. So as a result of this 2 years of the pandemic that we've been in, what have you seen in terms of the impact on people being at home, and now all of that trash that would have been generated in a business setting is now generated in the home setting. How have you dealt with that?
Yeah,
And
you've
do you have
nailed it.
numbers? Do you have a graph that you can share?
You know, it's funny. I had a presentation earlier today with that graph, but I can tell you, we had this nice little downward trend from, we measure trash production as pounds per household per week. It went from 22 in 2008 down to 15 in 2019, but then it went up in 2020 to 17. So it went from 15.5 to 17.3. So,
Wow.
and that's a huge spike in our world. So it was very noticeable, the trash increase. We do some recycling for businesses. We have 200 small businesses on our recycle program. So we collect from dozens of small businesses across Cambridge. And then we actually started a small business compost program 2 weeks ago, where we're collecting at 63 restaurants or food service businesses. We're collecting their food waste and taking it to our food waste site.
Thank you. Dan, do you have a question?
He's muted.
Oh, you're muted, Dan.
Okay, you hear me now?
Mhm.
What if anything can be done in terms of restaurant regulations regarding sort of food distribution, food disposal, and just what happens with food? It just seems like, you know, some change in regulations before it even gets into the waste category could really make a difference in terms of, you know, giving it away or whatever.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, the state is going to be making that a stricter compliance rule for commercial and businesses to divert their food waste if they produce more than 1,000 pounds per week. And so their goal is to really tackle all of your medium-sized restaurants, large restaurants, medium-sized institutions, hospitals, grocery stores. They'll all be required to either compost, or they could also choose to give away food waste that they could have given away. So there's a little bit of work being done on that. And in Cambridge specifically, that's something we're looking to do a little bit more on, because we can help businesses compost and that can also help them reduce their costs, which businesses are hurting, especially this year and last year because of the pandemic. They're really hurting. So, yeah.
Cecily, I see you've been putting a lot in the chat, but do you have a question?
Yeah, Mike, I was wondering about the labeling of plastic in the Chasing Arrows triangle. My understanding is that there are plastics that are not currently recyclable that have, you know, a similar label, but just a different number, and also compostable plastics. I'm not even sure how they're labeled, but like, is there any movement to improve the labeling of plastics so that maybe some things say not recyclable instead of, like, you know, a mysterious number, to make it more transparent for consumers so that consumers know when they're buying things whether the packaging is recyclable or not? And this ties into, I've heard these sort of maybe true, maybe not stories that if a compostable plastic gets put in the regular plastic recycling, it can melt and contaminate the regular recycling. So, I mean, it seems like that whole system needs to be improved in a graphic design and information, you know, accessibility sort of way. Is anybody working on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's no surprise that industry doesn't really work with municipalities to make this system work well for everyone. You know, industry puts stuff into the marketplace, and then it's up to us to figure out how to dispose of that stuff at the end. There's really, like, there's a strict wall. They don't ever breach that wall. But what movement's happening is, and this is a huge topic right now, is extended producer responsibility is a type of legislation that's really being pursued in the United States. So Maine and Oregon were the first states to do this in the last 6 or 12 months. They passed EPR laws, extended producer responsibility, which basically says, if you want to produce stuff, great, ship it out to all of our consumers. But at the end of the day, you're footing the bill for disposing of all that waste. So Amazon, your boxes, you have to pay for. Amazon, your bubble mailers, you have to pay for. every producer has to pay for it. What that does is that builds in an incentive that says, I need to make plastics recycling very clear, because if I don't make it clear, they're going to do the wrong thing with it. If they do the wrong thing, then I have to pay more as the producer of that good for disposing of it. So now I've got an incentive that's financial, which is the only thing they react to make it easier for the consumer. And so that's a bill that's in the State House right now. We're actually, I'm on a nonprofit that we're working to try to move that legislation along. And so that would be, I think, the key to breaching that divide between industry and government.
And so can people on this call do anything to support that legislation?
Yeah, call your reps and say, I don't have the exact bill number right in front of me, but I can maybe put it in the chat in a second. Yeah, and when it comes to the compostable items, so when it comes to plastic containers that you're trying to recycle or figure out if it's recyclable, there's two things to remember. If it's rigid, meaning it's like a plastic cup, and it's a container, put it in recycling. If it doesn't meet those two criterias, it's not recyclable. So don't worry about the numbers, don't worry about the chasing arrows, just remember rigid and container, and that's all you got to know.
Thank you, Mike. We can do, if you give me the legislation information about the legislation, I can share that in an email to the membership. I just want to make sure everybody goes to the chat, because Maggie McNally and Cecily Miller have been adding lots of great information about where you can buy recycled materials. And I don't know if you all have been to Cleanland at 89 Norfolk Street, right here in Cambridge, where you can buy bulk household goods, laundry detergent, hand soap, dish detergent, and other household items. So you can refill bottles instead of buying new ones. Thank you, Maggie. Mink, I see you have another question. Does anybody have a question that hasn't asked a question? Okay, Henrietta, let's call on Henrietta, and then Minka will let you ask the last question. Henrietta.
My question is about all the stuff we get from Amazon and from all the kind of stuff that people is getting delivered at their house. Any hints about that? I mean, apart from buying local is really a better idea for so many reasons. What if you are buying from Amazon? It does look like they changed the packaging from that horrible plastic just in the past month to something that looks more like brown paper. But that must be just a ton of things. They're taking back the packaging at Whole Foods. Is that part of what's happening?
So that paper envelope that you get from them, that is recyclable. The cardboard box is recyclable. The plastic pillows that you get inside of a box, those you can't put in your curbside recycling, but you can bring it to our recycle center where we have a plastic film recycling. So it's kind of similar to your plastic bag you'd get at a grocery store, those kind of plastic bags. We do accept at the recycle center. And so you can go on our website, cambridgema.gov/recycle, and you can look up different items and how to get rid of them on that website. And the same goes for their plastic envelopes. Those are kind of the same material as the plastic like bubble mailer things. Those can be recycled at the plastic bag recycling at the city's recycle center, but they can't go in your curbside recycling. So hopefully that answers all the Amazon.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your program tonight. I think everybody has found it incredibly informative and important. We thank you for all of your work on behalf of the city, on behalf of us, and thank you for sharing the links. I'll share them with the group following the lecture, and we will post this at the Cambridge Club website. Thank you, Ed Belove. And Laura, thank you for recording this and managing the Zoom.